What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again. We got another quick video. Concealed carry permits. Let's talk about it. So recently, I've been talking to you guys specifically about how concealed carry permits are unconstitutional. The late United Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has already dissented, saying that she believed that carrying concealed in your pocket a pistol is ingrained within the Second Amendment. The current Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has also spoken about the hypocrisy of concealed carry permits in Florida, about how slaves or newly freed slaves were carrying concealed to protect themselves from vigilantes and those who wanted to put them back into indentured servitude or some form of slavery. And so permits were enacted as another form of a Jim Crow law or slave code law. Now, I've given out multiple pieces of information to include the letter in which was written by Christopher Columbus when he specifically talked about the foundational Black Americans or Indians that were here when he came here, about how they were timid and full of fear and without any type of iron, right? And he specified that he could take the entire, region or nation with maybe a handful of Englishmen or frontiersmen, right? Now, the 14th Amendment specifically states that no state shall enact a law which changes a liberty into a privilege. And Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham specifically states that if a state enacts a law in which infringes upon an individual's right to liberty, then that individual can act with impunity. Now, during the 16, 15, 14, 17, and even 1800s, there were no concealed carry permits. In fact, it was only about 50 years after the Second Amendment was written and ratified that we saw our first Second Amendment infringement, which was the concealed carry permit. I believe it was in Boston or something like that, right? During the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, people that lived in the open frontier had to deal with feral animals, packs of feral animals, robbers, thieves, bandits. They had to travel by foot, they had to travel by horse, they had to travel by wagon. During that time, they carried sword canes and different forms of weapons to include firearms like rifles, as well as pistols if you had enough money. And they carried them concealed, especially if you lived up north or in the eastern seaboard, because the type of clothing or attire in which was worn back then, they had to have it concealed because, well, the reality of the situation is a black powder rifle or firearm would not operate if it got wet. That's just the unfortunate reality because, well, when you go look at the modernization of the black powder rifle or the black powder pistol, there was such thing called a rain catch pan. Now, the rain catch pan helped prevent water getting into the locking chamber because if the black powder got wet, when the frizzing was scraped across the plate, it would not facilitate a spark. And when the spark that couldn't get inside or did get inside wet powder, well, it wouldn't ignite. And the whole point and purpose of a firearm is to make sure that you have it at a moment's notice for safety and security purposes. So that means during the 1400s, the 1500s, the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, people carried a firearm with them, loaded, because it took 2 to 3 minutes to load a rifle back then. So you had it ready to go. You had it accessibly. You had it with you, whether you were on horseback, whether you were on wagon, whether you were on foot. You had it underneath clothes because you didn't want it to get wet, especially during rain. If you were out in the environment, this is pre-modernization. So this liberty that everyone had access to during the 14, 15, 16, 17, and 1800s changed when people started developing towns and because they started to establish themselves because they wanted to be more modern. They transitioned and changed the liberty in which they all had from the 14, 15, 16, 17, and 1800s, now requiring people to become more modernized and more civilized to have a permit, which is an infringement. Because the liberty in which they had to carry concealed for safety and security purposes during those 4 centuries, they now limited to a state or a county right to carry within a town, which made it now a privilege. The 14th Amendment specifically states, a state shall not enact a law in which changes or turns a liberty into a privilege. This is the violation of the Constitution. Not only the Second Amendment, because it states it shall not be infringed, but also the 14th Amendment, because it changes and transitions the liberty of carrying a concealed weapon for safety and security that every American did from the 1400s to the 1800s into a privilege by having and forcing individuals to get a permit. I cannot point this out any clearer than what I have already done. Again, the late United Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg agrees with me. The current United States Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas also has an understanding. I've been talking about this for years. This is clear information. This is clear doctrine. This is clear statistical and factual data to give you the understanding and comprehension that Birmingham versus Shuttlesworth, to where an individual has the right, he has impunity to act appropriately, to utilize his liberty against the privilege, the unconstitutional privilege of the state, is the normative concept of a norm and more. This is why we are seeing more and more states enact constitutional carry, because we are starting to see more and more people wake up to the hypocrisy and the racial and racist practices that started in Florida, in which United States Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas talked about in the recent dissent of the last Second Amendment case, all the way up until now, to where I've been talking to you specifically about how carrying concealed is done so, and it is ingrained within the Second Amendment. I've reached out to as many people as I can. It's up to you now to hold down the safety, the security, as well as the original interpretation of the Second Amendment, as well as the Constitution, because it is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of all American citizens. And from the 14, 15, 16, 17, and 1800s, everybody was carrying concealed. So now the mandation to get a permit to exercise the same liberty that everybody had, in which they declared they no longer needed because they had attained enough wealth to declare themselves civilized. Well, that within itself is compromising the safety and security and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone else who did not have that same level of wealth, prosperity, and common practice of calling themselves civilized at that time.